A reader's engagement with any literary work is a complex, dynamic process. While the forms and structures of the text are constructed by an author, arguably the work of a text is not fully realized until it is animated by the reader, whose imagination, personal context, and reading history bring the text to life. As Mary Shelley's Monster reminds us, an author may provide an infinity of new images and impressions never before conceived by its audience. Nonetheless, it is the reader's situation and emotions that produce the experiences of ecstasy or dejection. It is the reader who interacts with the text to animate their experience of a literary world. The complexity of experiences that can be evoked by literature is recognised in the New South Wales Extension English Common Module, which uses the concept of literary worlds to encompass a diverse range of texts, subjects, and approaches to literary criticism. This common module is intended in part to provide critical language to connect a diverse range of prescribed texts and electives, which have titles as wide-ranging as Worlds of Upheaval, Literary Homelands, Literary Mindscapes, Reimagined Worlds, and Intersecting Worlds. And the part of the purpose of providing this common module is to have a common concept against which all students can be assessed. And you're being assessed primarily through your ability to construct, interpret, and analyze literary worlds. The terminology of the common module and the way it seeks to unite a diverse range of literary texts and concepts provides several challenges and questions for students about to embark on a study of literary worlds. This video will help students understand the New South Wales Education Authority's description of literary worlds by providing a discussion of some of the key terminology and providing you with a couple of theoretical frameworks that you might be able to look into and pursue in your own time. Okay, an overview of NISA terminology. In the module outline, the concept of a literary world is perhaps not very clearly defined, and it's a little bit unclear how the term differs from the similarly broad notion of a literary text, which is mentioned several times in the rubric. We're told texts construct worlds, represent lives within literary worlds, but the relationship between the two perhaps is a little bit unclear and might benefit from some further reflection. The metaphor of a literary world suggests a place that's being constructed, where the text provides signs, symbols, and structures that act as a framework for meaning making. Orhan Pamuk, in his Nobel Prize lecture, uses the metaphor of creating a new world when he is writing, using the analogy of someone building a bridge or a dome, stone by stone. In an observation that manages to be both fairly obvious and somewhat profound, Pamuk tells us that the stones we writers use are words. The way that Pamuk balances and reflects on his word choices, taking care, caressing and weighing and moving them around, reminds us that these worlds are a creation, a construction, a version of or representation of a reality. Pamuk suggests that he writes to create a space in which his inner self might emerge, a kind of fictionalized self perhaps, a space in which this inner self might live and breathe, pacing the bridges and standing beneath the domes his words have created. This reminds us of the action of the writers, constructing, weighing, representing certain aspects of this world. If this process is successful, arguably a reader might become immersed in such a space as well, not just the author's fictional self, as they are engaged in an imaginative act of making connections, inferring meaning, as well as visualizing and animating this world. You might benefit from looking into literary theories such as reader response theory and reception theory, which you can find some overviews for these on the Riverview Canvas page. If we consider this metaphor in some more detail, we might consider that the idea of a world generally involves the presence of numerous countries and peoples, suggesting that this space can be inhabited by a wide variety of readers who may experience the world in similar or different ways, forming a number of reading communities who are shaped by their interactions with each literary world. Conversely, numerous communities may be said to play an active role in shaping these worlds, with reading groups, literary movements, online communities, and writers' festivals, providing dialogue and interactions that inevitably shape a reader's experience of a literary world. So you might consider the way different literary paradigms are developed over time and in response to their context. The New South Wales Common Module rubric also describes this process as a way that ideas and ways of thinking are shaped by personal, social, historical, and cultural contexts. Despite the recurring use of terms like construct and represent, the experience of composers or authors within this process is not explicitly addressed in the rubric. Instead, we see that the text is the active agent. We're told that texts represent and illuminate the complexity of individual and collective lives. They construct private, public, and imaginary worlds and contribute to readers' awareness of the diversity of ideas, attitudes, and perspectives evident in texts. Conversely, the reader as a student is ever present. Students explore, analyze, evaluate, and compose literary worlds. In addition to this, students are instructed to consider how a text context shapes the values it represents, while also reflecting on their own values, assumptions, and dispositions in the reading process. The rubric also notes a way in which texts contribute to readers' awareness of ideas, attitudes, and perspectives, while noting that texts can explore new horizons and offer new insights, suggesting that literary texts can both build on readers' expectations while providing departures from conventions that might reshape expectations and perceptions of the text that you are reading. Perhaps this approach, which foregrounds the reader, is reflective of a post-structuralist view of literary theory. However, if we do consider the author and their influence in this process, perhaps it's both best to consider the author's self as similar to Pamuk's inner self that we mentioned earlier in the presentation, a constructed self or persona, not a fixed entity or a reality that is external to the text. Indeed, as part of their analysis and critical evaluation of textual representations, students are instructed to consider notions of identity, voice, and points of view, suggesting the way that literary texts tend to represent the experience of others, and that literary worlds create a space for readers to engage with a voice or point of view. Presumably, the way a reader interacts with a text might be either empathetic, following the text along, and accepting the text and the author's construction for what it is, or perhaps you could also engage with a literary text and a literary world in a combative way, challenging the text, being critical of the certain construction and representation that you're being offered. This kind of reading might be familiar to you from the Narratives That Shape Our World module in Year 11. Ultimately, to conclude, Nietzsche's description of literary worlds in all of this suggests a fairly complex process of meaning making, with mutual construction between the author and the reader operating on a number of levels. Literary worlds are shaped by the real world, while also shaping perceptions of the world around us. A reader's context shapes their response to text, while texts also shape readers' values.